Hello and welcome to Lean Into Green Telesummit, our collective quest towards sustainability. I'm Jenny Lamorgan. I'm a green entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com. And I'm happy to have with us today Denise O'Brien from the Women's Food Agriculture Network. Denise's life has been devoted to raising women's voices in agriculture. She's a founding mother of the Women's Food and Agriculture Network. WFAN is a community of women in sustainable agriculture. Their mission is to link and empower women to build food systems and communities that are healthy, just, sustainable, and that promote environmental integrity. Hello, Denise, and welcome to Lean Into Green, and thank you very much for being here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Jenny, and thank you for inviting me.
I found this quote by you, and I just love it, so I'm going to read it. Denise says, "My dream is that the landscape of industrial agriculture will change as women become the decision makers of their land. And to that end, I will devote my time on this earth to women, prairie restoration, and seed saving." And that's what we're going to talk with Denise about today. So, Denise, let's start with your telling us about the Women Food and Agriculture Network and you're the founding mother. How did you get started?
Well, I got to tell you, Jenny, when you said to me earlier about not being, you being an urban woman and not being, from a farm and that, I wasn't either until I married my husband who, when I met him, said he was going to be an organic farmer. And we live on the farm he grew up in, so he does come from a farming background. And through the 1980s, we had a really bad credit crisis in rural America. It's similar to the mortgage foreclosures and things that have happened in these past recent years all over the United States. We experienced that in Iowa and the Midwest and in the farm in rural areas, especially in the 1980s. It was totally there were suicides and bank closings and things that people, even with that recent history, so recent as the 80s, don't really remember. And during that time, my husband and I made a commitment to working on family farms, working for family farms so that they would be a viable economic entity. And so during the 80s, I got married in 1976, and we started farming right away. And so my first few years were learning about farming and learning the language of agriculture, which is a particular language, and learning to use the tractor and do all the farm chores that needed to be done. And then in the 80s, then when the farm crisis erupted, Larry and I decided to commit ourselves to changing policy, and we decided he would stay home and raise the kids and milk the cows, and I would be, whenever I was needed out on the road, that I would go out and be the farm activist. And so our last child, who was 6 months old at the time, became our farm crisis baby. She went with me everywhere, and I nursed at the back of the room, and she was busy working on paper things as she grew through this, and when I was conducting meetings and things, or when I was standing at a podium at a rally or a protest, she'd be walking around the podium. So we involved our children totally in our activities. And then during that time, it was during that time that I was becoming more and more informed about what rural women thought of themselves, rural farm women. And most of them thought of themselves as farmers' wives. And after I had done my so-called apprenticeship with my husband over the years, first few years of farming, I figured I was a farmer. I'd kind of earned my credentials, and so I would ask these women. I'd say, "So what do you do during the day?" And they said, "Well, I milk the cows, or I feed the pigs, and I go for equipment, or I bale the hay, or I rake the hay, or I do." And I said, "Wow, that sounds like being a farmer to me." And they said, "Oh, no, I'm a farmer's wife." And it was a generation of women that would be considered that too. It's the generation of women that would sign themselves Mrs. John Henry, not using their first name. So, and then I read a book in the 1980s called The Invisible Farmer, and it was a rural sociologist Carolyn Sachs from the University of Pennsylvania that wrote that and talked about women's invisibility on the farm, and but being a critical, integral part of the economic unit, a lot of times doing the books. And in the farm crisis I mentioned, the women knew what was coming, the crisis that was coming, because many of them did the books on the farm and would try to tell their husband, you know, things aren't good here, something's going wrong, we've got to do things differently. And the men would just like put their nose to the grindstone and say, and work harder, and with that attitude that a lot of us have, is if we work harder, everything will be all right. And it didn't turn out that way, and many women during that time, I'm sort of slipping back to that, but were victims of domestic abuse during that time as well. So during the 80s, I noticed women, you know, weren't really at the table of agriculture making decisions, and then my own personal experience of working and founding organizations all through the 80s and helping and going to Washington and working on policy and going to just even Des Moines, our state house, working on policy. The women were always relegated to other work, and even by progressive men, you know. And so I'd knock on the door and I'd say, hey, you know, I'd like to help. I'd like to share the work with you guys. And they'd say, oh, no, you're not ready for that yet. You're not ready. And so I eventually emerged. I out of the 90s, very frustrated, and in 1997 we decided to found this organization called Women, Food, and Agriculture Network, which was an offshoot of work that a friend and I did in preparation for the World Women's Meeting, the United Nations meeting in Beijing in 1995. And what we were trying to do during that time is to find case studies of women farmers in the United States, and we couldn't find any. It was really, you could find a case study of any farm woman in any country of the world but the United States almost. So we looked at some demographics and saw that women really did own land, a good percentage of farmland. And so we worked on, again, raising the visibility of women, and particularly at the United Nations level. And then when we came home from Beijing from that conference in 1995, I went to work on forming an organization so women could be heard, and making the decision that, you know, I think a lot of women go through their lives and wonder whether to work, you know, on the inside or on the outside, you know, and you try to work within the system and change things, or you get frustrated with that and work on the outside. And that was pretty much my feeling, is not to totally separate ourselves from doing the work, but really, really advocating for women to be a part of the decision-making process, whether it's policy, whether it's farm decisions on the farm, whether it's, policy is the big one I'm thinking of, or in organizations and running those organizations.
So leadership is an important part of women in agriculture, and I think that doing that work at the UN level, I think you must have found a lot of support for small farms and how successful and how sustainable small farming is.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I met many women from around the world, and I found examples of sustainability, but I also found examples of rural drudgery for women too, given situations in other countries with water and wood gathering and water gathering and those sort of things. So it was a mixed bag, yes.
So how much, in the United States here, how much ag land is owned by women?
Well, this is pretty revealing. Everybody's shocked to hear this, but land in the United, let's see, how can I say it? Rentable farmland. So land that is owned by people but rented out to tenant farmers. Women own nearly 50 to 51% of that, and that's pretty much nationwide. It's very strong in the Midwest, where we do have this strong agriculture base. But we've made this transition in the United States from what we called an owner-operator. So the owners of the land used to operate the land, and then as the farmers got older and the children maybe didn't take over, that land has been used as the retirement for farmers and for farm families. Possibly, it didn't always work this way, and so they are now. There's many farmers that are, people who are non-farmers who are farmland owners, and because women live longer than men, and that's just a demographic that's totally across the lines, whether it's agriculture or not. Women are inheriting farms from their husbands, and there's a lot of stories out there about husbands having heart attacks, dying young of cancer, doing that, and leaving women either knowing or not knowing about the land that they have, that they own but maybe not farm. Does that make sense?
So the owner-operated ag land is partly women-owned, but you're saying that 50% of the rentable ag land. So just can you explain that a little more to me? I'm not. It's
a little bit difficult. There's let me read you something that is something I just read this morning. It says that in Iowa, 95% of rented farmland is self-managed, which means that there's not a land manager, but the people who own the land manage the land. And so the people who farm the land, when you drive through the Midwest or you drive through the countryside, the people who are farming the land are tenant farmers for the majority part. They do not own the land. The people who own the land are an older age, and that is their asset. So when a farmer in Iowa, and it's still pretty much a male face in here with corn and soybeans, if he wants to expand his operation, there's very little opportunity for that farmer to buy more land, but he can rent land, and he or she, I should say. But again, the face of commodity agriculture is basically male. There's very few women.
And so what kind of and what kind of farming are women doing as opposed to the corn and soybeans?
The corn and soybeans. Well,
right.
We live here in the breadbasket. That's what I learned in grade school, that we lived in the breadbasket of the United States. And and actually, we don't. If you think of breadbasket, you think of wheat, and we don't grow much wheat in Iowa. Kansas grows wheat, but we grow corn and soybeans, and we're number one in corn and soybean production. We're number one in raising hogs, and so all of the policy at the national and state level has been geared towards industrialized agriculture. As a consequence of that, we have very poor water quality and very poor air quality because we have pesticides and herbicides, chemicals being sprayed all the time, and we have a very high use of nitrogen is a very important product, input that corn needs a lot of nitrogen to grow. And so as a consequence, we have a lot of nitrogen in our soil that in a wet spring like this year, we've had an incredibly wet spring, it all washes out of the soil and it goes down into our rivers and creeks, and it goes into the Mississippi River eventually from this huge watershed that we're in with Minnesota and South Dakota and Wisconsin. If you can think of the middle part of the United States all draining into the Mississippi River, then at the end of the Mississippi River at the Gulf of Mexico, our farm chemicals have caused a problem called hypoxia, and it is a dead zone. And last year it was 7,000 square miles that was dead, and no fish in that can live there. We've put shrimpers out of business in the Gulf of Mexico. So to go further, that's the commodity industrialized model. The women who are farming the land in Iowa and in the Midwest are farming smaller plots of land, maybe 10 to 20 acres, and they're growing food for eating, food for people to eat, and for their communities to eat. Many of them have small dairy farms, a lot of them goat farms, and many women make cheese. They've got fruit farms. They've got CSAs, the community-supported agriculture, where you buy a membership to a farm and then get receive for 18 to 20 weeks, you receive a basket or a bulk food produce that comes from that farm. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, are probably familiar with that. So they're doing they're women who are farming in Iowa are farming in this. It's almost like a parallel universe, and that they're growing actual food for people to eat. Where in Iowa, we import 95% of our foods that we consume from out of state. So
wow.
Women are trying to reverse that.
Well, 10 to 20 acres is a manageable size farm that you can actually farm sustainably. So so women are really making the difference as well as in farming, as well as in so many more areas of our lives.
Exactly.
So you have a video on your website that's really that really drew me in. It's women telling stories about their farms and growing up on farms, and so what is their relationship to the land? I mean, I think that by marrying a farmer, you became more connected to the land, certainly, and it just seems to be, when you talk to a farmer, you know, your passion with the land is immense. It's your feeling of happiness and health. When your land is healthy, you have more of a sense of well-being. Mm-hmm. So can you just talk maybe how that's specific to women and farming and sustainable farming and organic farming, and, you know, certainly providing food for your community is huge. It's a huge contribution.
Right. Yeah. Yes. The video is very interesting. I love to listen to the stories of the women as they talk about growing up on a farm. And I have to say, there's also another part of that. And if you read any history about women on the farm and that, there's two ways of looking at a farm. You really love it, and you want to be the farmer. And you may not have that opportunity because there's boys in your family, and that it was always a boys' thing, that not ever a girls' thing, and so there's been disappointment. The other part is that all the focus of everything was on the farm, and I've read in various journals that women have written over the years that, you know, making food for all the men that came for threshing, and doing the laundry by hand, and having all the money, all the profits go back to the farm to make the farm profitable, and then maybe sometime getting things to modernize your house. The house and the housewife were always secondary. So there's the whole, you know, range of feelings towards agriculture and farming, and so I don't want to paint a picture that it's just, you know, it was everything's wonderful and that. But the people that you do talk to, the women that I've talked to over the years, that have wanted to farm or who own land and want to do right by the land, and that have wonderful stories from their childhood about playing in the creeks or you know, helping make hay, and of course the other part of that is always remembering those things fondly when at the time they might not have been so fun. I mean, haymaking is a very interesting activity. It's very manual work and very hot in July, and so you forget about all the itchiness and all the bugs and all the scratches that you get when it comes to wintertime and you're feeding the hay to the animals, and that you forget about July being 100 degrees and hot. But women feel a real responsibility to their community and to their and to their land. And a lot of women got their conservation ethic from their husbands. In the 1950s, there was a strong conservation ethic in the United States, and people planted trees. In Iowa, people planted trees, and they put in conservation programs and everything. And then as we entered the 70s and got into just growing food, growing commodities fence row to fence row so we could feed the world. The whole thing about feeding the world was a frenzy, and it turned the land into a commodity and not something you care for, but something you use, and not necessarily do you put things back that you take out. So I think we've gotten to the point with industrialized agriculture where we have used it as the land as a medium, and we put the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the chemicals and everything on it to grow something, but the soil is basically a dead medium now. You're not working with the microbes and all the living soil that's there to work in partnership. That's I think where male and female diverge. Although there's many good male farmers that understand soil and soil health and that, but there's just something about wanting to do right by things that tend for women to veer towards that being responsible and having a conservation ethic to work with the land and in partnership with the land rather than using it as a commodity, rather than dominating it. I mean, it's just this domination is just so prevalent in nature. We see it everywhere. It's like, oh, climate change, there's no climate change. We can overcome that. It's a real male attitude that we can dominate things, and it's just not working.
Well, in doing this summit and just in general, I just hear over and over how women in social media, how women in policy making, in all of these areas, how we're just programmed to work in relationship.
Yes.
And that is the new way, the new wave that's coming, and it's coming, multiculturally, multidimensionally,
So
it's coming through in so many different ways.
Yes.
One woman at a time. I mean, you're talking about a farm at a time, a family-owned, family-worked farm at a time.
Yes.
And it's, but the good news is it's happening. We're here, and I think remembering that we were doing this, in the 80s and the 60s and in the 40s. I mean, there is a conservation ethic in America, and it lives, in the farmland, and it lives in the cities. It's everywhere, and it's getting magnified now.
Yes.
So,
I hope so. I'm most optimistic about it, but when you live where I live, in the belly of the beast, as we say, it's just it's so disconcerting. I was driving into town the other day, and I was listening to the farm radio, and Iowa this year, because of all the rain early on, has a very high nitrate content in our water, and high nitrates can cause blue babies. The nitrates rob the blood of oxygen, and so and Des Moines, Iowa has the most expensive nitrate filtration system in the world, and the water system the water for Des Moines comes out of the Raccoon River, which comes down from farmland, and the people are getting really upset that the farmers are not taking care of the soil or of the pollution, and so they're getting vocal about it. And this program that I heard was by the Soybean Association, and the soybean says, well, the waterworks people in Des Moines, Iowa are basically telling lies, is what they were saying, and that we farmers are good, to do the things that we need to do, and farmers are good. I won't say they're not good, but they're not doing the right thing because they're held hostage by the Monsantos and the Cargills of the world to farm to feed the world, which is a fallacy. We don't feed the world, and there's many people that ask the question, why can't the world feed itself, and why can't we have a reserve, just in case there's problems? Why do we have to have this whole? Why does the United States have to have this? The United States farmers have to have this attitude, or this thing? It's a good moral. There's no doubt about it that it's a good moral cause to feed the world, but it's not happening, and it's at the sacrifice of our land.
Right, and it happens. We can feed the world if we do it on small farms,
Yes.
you know, around the world, and
It's
if we
improving.
encourage that.
Yes.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly, and that's. I mean, we know that from at the UN level from the work that comes there. The trouble with the work at the UN is it doesn't filter down to the grassroots. You know,
well,
the
not in our
grassroots
country.
it doesn't. Yeah,
No.
yeah. Because the grassroots and the UN is doing the same thing. It's that huge, you know, bulldozer in the middle that's getting in the way, really.
Yes.
So, you know, it's no different here than it is in every other country. Certainly, the farmers in India have dealt with Monsanto and
Exactly.
and with much strife. So,
Yes.
well, I know that the Women's Food and Agriculture Network has 3 programs. Denise, can you tell us about the first one, which is Harvesting Our Potential?
Yes, that's a fun one, and that is where women farmers experienced women farmers are being mentors to young women who want to farm, and so and there's a lot of sustainable agriculture organizations in the United States that have programs that are doing this, and some are very well established, and maybe some might be even 10 years old or so, or maybe even more, but there's never been one focused fully on women. So Women's Food and Agriculture Network got a grant from the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, to work on providing opportunities for young women to learn from older women.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and so we have the program going, and it's just in its first year, and it's we're going to have, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a midsummer meeting here at my farm with the mentors and the mentees, and kind of do a let's look at what's happened so far type of meeting, and talk about it. And then this program's going to be a 3-year program, and we're doing it in Iowa and Nebraska. So, and we've had interns on our farm in pretty non-formal ways since 1992, basically, and my husband and I. And what those people do, or they always learn by us side by side, you know, learning, you know, things about how to tell, you know, when to plant, when to harvest, and those sort of things. But a lot of times it hasn't been as formalized with a curriculum, and this program has a curriculum that the women mentors have developed about, you know, what the steps through a season at their farm, and it going from planning to the financial management to the actual implementation of you know, the planting the seeds and harvesting the seeds and marketing and all of that. So it's a pretty comprehensive program, and at the same time, the young women who are going through the program are paid a stipend. We're trying to make sure that people are not used. There's sometimes you get the feedback from young people that internships are basically slave labor, for lack of a better term. And so we're trying to not fall into that, because there are many programs that are that way, and
yes.
And you have to pay for the experience or whatever. So this is a formalization of women teaching women, and it's great. And one of the things that I say it's great. There's many different issues, you know, when you come to match personalities and, you know, the timing and expectations and things like that. But there is, and lots of times these young women will understand that they don't want to farm, actually. It's really hard. And yet others just get committed to it for life. And so it's a good lesson to learn, and we're hoping that we turn out farmers, because the average age of farmers in the United States is like 56 years old, 56 to 65, somewhere in there. And so we need replacement farmers. Many of these young people coming into farming, both male and female, come from an urban background. And there is something about growing up on a farm and knowing how to work through the seasons that helps you. It gives you a step up on learning. And many of these people don't have that, don't come from that. And just, you know, I feel like my 3 children that grew up on a farm, they got up, they when we milked cows, they had their calf chores, they gathered eggs from the chickens. There was a routine to your life, and it's a seasonal routine, especially in Iowa where we have definite seasons. And so many of these people, the young people that are coming into these programs, don't have that background. And I always wonder sometimes, is like, how does someone learn that? And just to the fact that you have to fix your own machinery and things, and you have to maintain a chainsaw, or you have to change the oil in the tractor. You know, very practical things that I think when you live in an urban area, well, and that's a generalization I don't want to say. Many people grow up in families where they just call up someone to fix it, and when you live on a income that you're raising off of your farm, it's a pretty moderate income, and so you have to learn how to do these things yourself. So that's a part of the learning process, is how do we maintain our tractors so that they stay in good shape? How do we, sharpen our chainsaw blades so we don't have to run to town and get them sharpened, and things like that.
Right, and it's living more simply, really.
Yes, it is. It's not I wouldn't say it's a survivalist mode, but it's doing things for yourself, learning that and feeling confident to do that, to be, that's one thing I learned from my husband in the very beginnings of my farming career, is that, if I broke it, I had to fix it, and he was right there to help me fix it. And I broke things in the beginning. I tore out fence. With some machinery, with some equipment and that. But I also learned to have the confidence to be able to fix it too.
Right. Well, it's certainly empowering.
Yes.
To have those kinds of skills.
Yes.
So your other program is Women Caring for the Land, and
yes.
I definitely with this telesummit we want to deepen our connection with the land, and I think that talking to women farmers is a great way to do that. So
yes.
What is your program, Women Caring for the Land?
Well, this is definitely very focused on women who have inherited land through their family, through their husband, whatever. So what we started doing in early 2000 was bringing women together to talk about what they thought about their land and what they wanted to do with it. And it was very interesting because the first meetings that we had, the women were really surprised that we were asking them those questions. It's like, you're asking me? And it was kind of a shock to them. And once they started, if we asked the question, if you had an open checkbook and the sky is the limit, what would you like to do with your farm? What would you like to dream about your farm? And it took women a while to get into that, but after they did, it was very apparent that the same thing came through over and over again all over the state, and that was that they'd like to do conservation and natural resource management. They'd like to have ponds. They'd like to have, forests, and they'd like to have families on the land. And those are exactly the opposite of what's happening out here. We have trees being bulldozed, farmsteads being bulldozed. We have everything's being planted, and there's not much conservation. And so those beginning meetings about finding out where women are about that then led to a type of meeting that we call a learning circle. So we invited women to come into a learning circle, understanding that we are our own experts, that we have the knowledge within us, basically, that from each other, not maybe all in our own body or in our own minds, but in a group of women probably we do. And so women would get together and talk about what they'd like to do with their land and how can they do it with their land. So one of the ways that men share that information is they go to the local elevator where they sell their commodities, or they go to the cafe, or they go to the bar. and people find out how much it costs to, for rent, how much their commodities are. They find out all that pertinent information that is the economy of a rural area. Women, on the other hand, go to, church basements, and they put packets together to send to children in Haiti, or they do Sunday school, or they meet in their sororities or whatever, and don't talk about those things. That's not a part of their social agenda, or their social responsibility agenda, I should say, because it's very, very rare that women do things socially without a purpose. Does that make sense? Like, we meet and we do things, right, but we're raising money to do this, or we're raising consciousness to do that, or something. So these women never had a place to share this really pertinent information. And so these learning circles have become a place where women say, well, I want to do this with my land. And then the other women say, yeah, that's a really good idea. We'll support you in this. And then another piece is that leases. And this is hard for people to imagine, but when you lease or rent your land, many women it's on a handshake. It's not a written agreement. And so we're teaching women that they need to have written agreements, and that if they want conservation practice on their land, that they need to write that into the agreement. And many women will say, oh, I can't do that because then no one would rent my land. And the thing that these women don't understand is that their land is such a hot commodity that there's probably a line 25 men long ready to rent their land, and they would be probably in that line of 25 men. There's going to be one or two people there that would say, I'll do what you want to do. We'll do it your way.
And that number is increasing all the time.
Yes.
Yes. As people are becoming more aware that it is possible and it is achievable, yes, and all of the benefits of sustainability for sure.
Well, and the one meeting I went to not that long ago, there was a woman, a 40-year-old woman whose parents had left her land, and she had a good relationship with her tenant, but then it really deteriorated, and it was very obvious to her that he was trying to land grab, get her land, and they had really really bad relationship, and she engaged with the governmental agencies to help her on her land, and it went so far that the relationship deteriorated so that the land tenant, got a restraining order for her not to go on her own land. And this is like, you're kidding. This can't be real. And it was true. And then another one where this woman was partnering, she was with her husband all their life, but he died suddenly, and she was going through all his paperwork and everything. She had no idea how to run the farm. And she said she had these boxes. She had a box for these receipts, a box for this receipt, or those, papers, and then her last box was her box for tears, where she could, and his family was not being nice to her about how, and she was married for 47 years to this guy, and they were not helping her at all figure out what to do. In fact, they were trying to get her land. I mean, there's some really awful stories, but there's some really good stories as well. But that's what's happening out here.
Yeah, and it's happening to women in business. It's happening to women, all over. We're having to work smarter,
work smarter, so we're not taken advantage of. Yeah,
exactly. For ourselves, for our children, and in the realm of farming, it's for the whole community that we get smarter.
Yes.
Now, I know another love of yours is prairie restoration, so I would just love to hear you talk about that.
Well, I'm at a very infant stage at doing that. I have wonderful friends that have been prairie restorationists for all their lives, and I wish I would have started earlier. My husband and I say that, but Iowa was once 98% prairie and wetlands, and now we're the most cultivated state in the entire United States, and that means that every inch of what we got is planted, and so we no longer we have remnants of prairie, and we have remnants of wetlands and things, but it's like 2% to what it used to be. And so the prairie, I mean, one of the reasons that we still are able to have such rich farmland is what was built up over the thousands and thousands of years with the glaciers and you know, the upheavals of time to have the most incredibly rich topsoil in the world. And as you know, as the United States was colonized, as people with the Western movement happened, the eminent domain and all this, it was with that attitude that man could overcome nature, and we just, once they started, you know, putting the plow to the prairie, it just hardly stopped. And if people have watched the Dust Bowl on PBS, it was an excellent series that just showed this incredible turning over of the soil and planting to things that lasted only for a few years. It was so short term. So Prairie has given us what we have now, and it's our obligation, it's our duty to return pieces that we can back to Prairie in order to have that. And so my husband and I have a little bit of, we've got some prairie flowers and we've got some prairie grasses and that, but there's nice plots of several hundred acres. There's a family that lives about 60 miles north of us, and they're all women, and there are 5 women in that family, and they have like 400 and 500 acres of prairie, and they are using it for a working landscape. They have cattle, they raise cattle, and they burn the prairie when they have prairie burns when they schedule them, and they're just doing magnificent work to restore the land to what it once was, and I just wish I could do more and wish I would have done it sooner, but I'm glad I'm doing it now.
Wow, and that's an example of cattle farming that's not destroying the land.
Exactly. No, it's working, again, it's working in balance, it's working in nature, with nature, and it's working as partners. Yep. Wow.
Well, heroines for sure.
Yes.
Women working in agriculture.
Yes.
So let's finish up by talking about seed saving. I know that's another passion of yours and something that you'll continue to work with.
Well, again, what's brought home to me about seed saving, and I've only done it on a very small scale. There's others that have done incredible work with it, and one especially is a woman named Diane Wheely, and she runs the Seed Savers Exchange in northeast Iowa, and it's an incredible place to go. And she has a wonderful book called Gathering, and it's her memoir of starting out with seed saving, her and her husband. And we're having all these issues now with Monsanto owning, having patents on life forms and patents on seeds and patents on this, and that everyone has to, bow at the altar of Monsanto to get permission to do whatever, and if they don't, then they get sued and they get run through the, courts, and that's my referral to the genetically altered, the genetically engineered seeds that we just keep fighting, and they keep finding that we are having side effects of with cattle and things. But so the best way it's kind of my attitude about the best way to, I do confrontation, and I think that when something's wrong, we need to set it right, and if it takes confrontation, it takes confrontation. But if there's something, going wrong, then we have to present an alternative. We can't just confront. So I think with the women getting to the decision-making table, women in politics, which we didn't talk about plate to politics, but also then seed saving. If we're going to overcome these giant corporations that own everything and have the lawyers to be able to file the patents and the money to be able to do that, then we have to become a grassroots organized to be saving seeds and exchanging those seeds and preserving those seeds and the qualities of those seeds, because it's like the heritage animals that we have, the poultry and beef and sheep and hogs and that. Those are genetics that, through the years were refined, and now they've, bigger industrialized agriculture has honed them down so focused to certain traits that if there's a disease, it can knock out everything. And there's something happening in the pigs in Iowa right now. There's a porcine virus that's happening, and lots of baby pigs are dying out here because because they're becoming immune to antibiotics, and two, they've just put the traits at so few that, and the turkey industry is this way too, that one disease could wipe everything out. So it's really our responsibility to save seeds and to save the genetics of our animals to be able to continue to have that basis, of life.
And we can thank you for that, and thank you for your passion about it. We can all buy seeds from seedsavers.org.
Yes.
So that's a wonderful resource for all of us. Well, let's talk a little bit about Plate to Politics, where women can connect with women leaders and receive training, leadership training.
Yes, well, that's another passion of mine as well, because if we're not there at the table making decisions, then the decisions are going to be made for us, and they're not always in our best interest. And so it's just imperative that we become involved, and it can be from Little League to school board to county supervisor or commissioner to, as far as the President of the United States. And most women, I think, know by now that we're ill-represented in Congress. I mean, we're well represented by the women who are there. We're just in such a minority. And the other part of it is that we could bring a different picture to politics. It's one reason no one wants to run for office is because it takes so much money. Everybody's so nasty to each other, and the special interests can pretty much buy the election. So one of the biggest things we need to work on is campaign reform, and so that everybody has a chance to run for office. And my own personal experience with this is that when my kids were little, I ran for county supervisor, and I knocked on all the doors, and I ran against an incumbent, which isn't the best decision. The best strategy is to run when there's an open seat, and that gives you a leg up. But I didn't know that at the time, and I just thought I wanted to be supervisor, so I did. And I lost by very few votes, but it was interesting work, and I got around, the county and my district. And then I ran for school board, and I got defeated in that as well. It was and that was a funny story, and all of us have these kind of stories. My story was that the president of the school board and I had served on the Little League board together, and we'd raised money for a new Little League field and that. But I was considered kind of a troublemaker because I would ask questions. And one of the questions I asked one time was that, when the little boys are in 4th grade, they get fully suited in a baseball outfit, and the little girls wear T-shirts. What's wrong with this picture? and of course, then we had to raise more money so the girls could be fully outfitted. But geez, come on, what kind of message does that send? So anyway, the school board president got someone to run against me, and I was also beat on that one. And then a few years back, I decided that I wanted to run for Secretary of Agriculture of the state of Iowa, which is an elected position in about 11 states in the United States, and other states appoint them. And I ran a primary, and I won the primary, and I ran in the general election, and I was ahead a couple weeks out from the general election. And then an insurance company, the Farm Bureau Insurance Company, that poses as a farm organization, put the kibosh on me and did a real nasty last 72-hour campaign that really that I lost by 2 percentage points. So I didn't lose by much, but it was a wonderful way to get my message, not just my message. I was the carrier of the message of people about local food in our cafeterias, food in our schools, obesity, these kind of issues that were sounding alarms with parents and things. It was a good way to talk to that issue all over the state of Iowa, and I'm really glad I did it. I hated the last the last part of it, and I see people to this day and they say that wasn't fair what happened to you and that, but I made a lot of friends and the issues were out there, and it's a good way, so you have to be thick-skinned, I guess is the story, the lesson. But we also have to change how elections, not elections, how campaigns, how they're financed, so that everybody has a chance. Because I ran as a Democrat, but I had a lot of Democrats against me as well, and they just it was scary for people to think that it wasn't because it was a woman, because a woman had already been ag commissioner. It was about being an organic farmer that was really scary too.
Oh, interesting, and threatening to the money system.
Oh, yes.
So your Plate to Politics program is so important because it gives women connection with other women leaders, and that kind of support, I know from the Women's National Political Caucus work, that it's crucial for success. But I'm glad you were able to do so much politicking,
Well, and I got carried away. I'm sorry. I should have talked about Plate to Politics, but it's, there's a webinar series and it's really, really to encourage women to, step forward and to create, Emily's List is a good example of, financing. There's very good programs out there, and until I feel like a lot of times I'm a gender police. When I look at organizations, I look at the gender balance on their boards of directors and their staff and things, and I'm always sorely disappointed. It's very rare when it's in our favor, in the favor of women. We just have a long ways to go that way. And I just read something in the paper the other day about that. That there is a difference in the way boards operate and make decisions when women are at the table.
Very definitely, and that's true for everything across the board. So.
Yes.
But the good news is women are standing up and getting vocal, and it's happening globally.
Yes.
It's and I think if the more we watch the international momentum, the more we're encouraged, because we don't get a lot of news about it here in this country, but it's going on globally, it's going on internationally. Women are standing up, and the young people are coming through with such amazing solutions and ideas, and they don't want to work in organizations that aren't green and forward thinking. So the world is changing in a really good way, and you've had a lot to do. Thank you very much for your work.
Oh,
nationally
it's a pleasure.
and internationally, and going to Beijing. That's all. That's huge that you were able to be there.
It is, and I just have to say that I've been a very lucky person, a very blessed person to have found a partner such as my husband, who is. I always tease him and say he's the best feminist out there, because he's non-judgmental. He came from a family that learned unconditional love, and it's just amazing to me that doesn't always have to be the case, that you find someone who can support you, but it sure helps.
Well, feminism certainly helps men, women, and children. It's not just focused on women. Definitely, again, when you do what's right for women, it's right for the world.
Everyone.
And men benefit tremendously when their lives are touched by feminism. That's right. For sure.
Yep.
So, well, thank you very, very much for being with us, and your wisdom and your commitment to raising women's voices in agriculture. And folks can visit your website at WFAN.org. We've got a link up for you, and we've got a link to your newsletter as well. I'm going to sign up for that. I know it's going to be a little voice from the Midwest. And from the farmland. Exactly. And then Seed Savers as well. Seedsavers.org is a wonderful resource for all of us.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And,
you're so welcome, Jenny.
I wanted to deepen our heart connection to the earth and to the land, and I think that you have helped us accomplish that. And our way of understanding going green, it's immense. So it touches so many different aspects of our lives, and you've brought a big piece of it here for us.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you for the work that you do to get that word out, and I'll do anything I can. I think I always say that to help change this world, by golly, as long as I'm here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay.
And stay tuned for more interviews from Lean into Green. Thank you all, and bye-bye for now.
Jenny?